Hello and welcome to the Harbridge and Cross training program on Hazard Assessments, the DTA form, Chapter 2, Version 1.0. At Harbridge and Cross, we are committed to health and safety and believe in order to be effective, health and safety must be cultural and expressed at all levels of the organization. This is our agenda. First, we're going to discuss the roles and responsibilities of all workplace parties. From there, we're going to talk about the Hazard Assessment DTA forms, including how to complete them. We're going to identify activities, identify hazards, controls, and also set the risk level rating. There's also a record management system where we're going to keep and file all of our DTA forms, and of course, review core audit questions. Please hold all questions to the end. Roles and responsibilities. At Harbridge and Cross, there are no free lunches. Everyone has a job to do. Beginning with senior management, their job is to review the hazard assessment process annually and apply changes to the health and safety manual. They are to review hazard near miss trends and develop training programs to reduce common hazards at the workplace. Superintendents have an important job to do. They are to develop and participate in the pre-start meeting to identify hazards and update the project critical task list, review and provide written responses to all hazard near miss reports, review and develop DTA reports daily, ensuring that corrective controls are applied. They are to sign off and review all high-risk activities and ensure safe job procedures are available. And they are to also perform site inspections, ensuring all hazards are identified and proper controls are in place. Subtrade foremen have an important job to do. They are to participate in the pre-start meeting and identify any kind of potential high-risk hazards they're going to encounter on the project, provide the site superintendents copies of all safe job procedures, and ensure workers are completing and identifying hazard near misses. Your health and safety coordinator is there to support you. They are to develop and participate in the pre-start program to identify high-risk activities and record them on the project critical task list, review hazard near miss forms to identify recurring themes, review DTA reports and ensure corrective controls are in place, and perform site inspections to ensure all hazards are identified and proper controls are executed at the workplace. And of course, workers have an important role. They are to review the DTA assessment with their supervisor every day and ensure that controls that are identified are proper to the work activity. They are to use the hazard near miss report form to identify any hazards or near misses at the workplace, and of course perform a daily inspection of your tools or equipment to identify any hazards. Hazard Assessment, DTA. This is a copy of the DTA form. DTA stands for Daily Task Assessment. The goal of the DTA is to identify your activities, its hazards, and to put in place effective controls to mitigate accidents or injuries to both yourself, other workers, or to the project. This form must be reviewed and signed off daily by all Harbridge and Cross field staff, including superintendents, carpenters, and laborers. Subcontractors are not to use this form. This form is used exclusively for Harbridge and Cross staff only, and it must be fully completed. If you do not have any workers on site for the day, or if you're not engaging in any activities, it's also a good practice to just fill out one of these forms and include here in the space provided that no work is taking place. This way, when an auditor is doing an assessment of your workplace, they're going to be able to identify that an assessment was done and that no work was taking place on this day. You want to ensure that the hazard assessment form is fully completed and that all titles are properly filled out. Incomplete or missing forms will count as a penalty against Harbridge and Cross and will hurt us in the event of an external auditor. The first step are completing your titles, including the project name, today's date, the superintendent, and the work location. Oftentimes, these items can already be filled out on the computer and printed in order to save you some time. Next, you want to identify some of the PPE that is required. Basic PPE, including hard hat and work boots, must be worn at all times. And in some cases, for activity-specific requirements, you may need specialized PPE, including high visibility vests, harnesses, lanyards, safety glasses, respirators, hearing protections, or traffic control signs. The next part is the meat and potatoes. You want to fill out your DTA forms. Again, all fields must be fully completed, including identifying the task, the hazards associated with that task, the risk rating, the controls, and a risk review. And of course, all members must sign off in the space provided. Superintendents must also sign off on all hazard assessment forms, showing that they have reviewed them. Step 1. Identifying the activity or task. Activities are the broken down components required to complete an assignment. For example, cutting or grinding steel. The activities include completing a hot work permit, equipment inspection on your tools, and setting off your control zones or to block off areas to prevent workers from getting hurt. We have this column called Table 1 that is used to identify some of the common activities you can encounter on your projects. Use this to help you populate your daily activities, including if you're performing housekeeping, setting up signs or hoarding, unloading deliveries, performing concrete chipping, working outside or inside, working on the roof, setting up winter protection, or any of the above. Once you identify your task, the next thing you want to identify are the hazards associated with that individual task. All tasks have hazards, including housekeeping. Hazards are risks associated with an activity and are generally grouped into 4 major categories, including physical hazards, chemical hazards, ergonomic hazards, and biological hazards. Let's look at them a little bit closely. Physical hazards are factors within the immediate environment. This includes heat and cold stresses, overhead work, fall hazards, cuts, scrapes, or burns, and of course moving equipment. Chemical hazards are exposures to chemicals, including solid, liquids, and gases. They include fuels such as your diesel or your gasoline, propane, blue skinning, spill cleanups, and of course compressed gases. Ergonomic hazards are defined as body positioning, muscular scoliosis, or awkward movements. Additionally, they can be identified as work positioning, work overhead, repetitive motion, and of course vibration. And lastly, biological hazards. Biohazards, living agents that threaten organisms. They include bird or bat droppings, insect bites, fungus, and of course infection controls. So please use this chart to help fill in the hazard identification section of your DTA form. Let's look at an example. In the following example, we've identified workers doing the following tasks, including working at heights, blue skinning, and housekeeping. We got this information using the first table above. From there, we identified all the hazards tied to that specific task, including working at heights. The risk, of course, is a fall hazard, and this is called a high-risk activity. To control these risks, we're going to use a safe job procedure called working at heights travel restraint. We're also going to have our harness, lanyard, and anchor point. And for a risk review, we're going to reassess this as a medium risk activity. For blue skinning, again, there's chemical hazards associated with this. We're going to identify this as a medium risk activity, and the controls are going to include referring to our SDS, using gloves, and having good ventilation. And again, the risk review has been reassessed as a medium risk activity. And lastly, housekeeping. The hazards, of course, include slip, trips, and falls. This is a low risk activity, and the controls include removing garbage, keeping access, egress clear, etc. And again, the risk review is low. We're going to spend a little bit more time talking about the controls and risk reviews a little bit later. Let's first play a little game, identifying the hazards. Using the items below, identify if the hazard is physical, chemical, ergonomic, or biological. Let's take a minute to assess. Okay, time's up. Let's see what you've come up with. In the first example, we're talking about cold stresses, like working outside in the cold. This is a physical hazard. In the next picture, we see a propane cylinder. A propane is a chemical hazard and can lead to frost bites or other chemical exposures. So we've identified it as a chemical hazard. In the next picture, we've identified a bat. This could refer to bat bites or bat droppings, and of course, they all represent biological hazards. The next picture below shows a person lifting a box. This refers to an ergonomic hazard. So you want to make sure you're bending properly when lifting up heavy objects, or more importantly, using equipment or a buddy to help you pick them up. In this next picture, we see a worker chipping concrete. This both represents an ergonomic hazard because we're dealing with vibrations, and a physical hazard because there's the flying particles of the chipped concrete. And of course, in the last picture here, it identifies flying particles and the importance of wearing safety glasses, which is a physical hazard. Once you've identified your hazards, the next thing is to assign the risk rating system. At Harbridge and Cross, we use a 3-step risk rating system, which is based on the probability of occurrence or the severity of the injury. To keep it a little bit more simple, we've defined pre-assessments for these risk rating items. Beginning with low risk. A low risk activity is something that does not require any kind of specialized PPE or specialized instructions. And a good example is just general housekeeping. Medium risk activities include activities that require specialized PPE or instructions. For example, using power tools or working off of a ladder. High risk activities are the meat and potatoes. High risk activities are defined as any activities involving working at heights or working at heights equipment or any moving equipment above 10 horsepower. If any of these activities are taking place, the activity is 100% high risk. In construction, it is important to know that we are mostly involved with medium and high risk activities. Very little construction is considered low risk. Your DTA should reflect the reality of our industry. In short, do not half-ass a DTA. If it is high risk, call it high risk. Don't try to nickel and dime it. An auditor will quickly pick up on the deficiency and score it against us. So let's make sure we're doing it right. Let's play a little game. Identify the risk rating. Is it low, medium, or high? Let's take a minute. Okay, time's up. Let's see what you've come up with. In the first example, we have a skid steer. This is a high risk activity because it can produce more than 10 horsepower. The next picture over shows a worker working off of a ladder. Again, he is less than 10 feet, so working at heights equipment is not required. So we've called this a medium risk activity. The next picture over shows a worker doing general housekeeping. This is, of course, a low-risk activity. Just below it, we have another worker simulating working at heights, travel restraint. And again, because he's wearing working at heights equipment, there is propensity of a fall or critical injury, so this is a high-risk activity. In the next picture over, we have a person grinding steel. Notice they're wearing specialized PPE, including gloves and a face shield. This is medium risk. And in the last example here, we have a worker simulating traffic control. Because he's working with other pieces of equipment or the surrounding environment that can produce more than 10 horsepower, this too is classified as a high risk activity. Great job, everyone. Step 4, set up controls to eliminate or limit the hazard. Controls are important because they reduce injuries or accidents relating to the hazard of an activity. We have 3 main categories of hazard controls. The first is engineering controls, which is of course the most effective, and they include controlling hazards at the source. Administrative controls are the next most effective controlling measures, and they're controlling hazards along the path. And the least effective is of course PPE because it only controls the hazards at the workers. It's important to know that when a worker is using PPE, the immediate hazard still exists for other workers. That's why it's least effective. Let's talk about some types of engineering controls. We can eliminate the hazard altogether, redesign it, automate it, or contain it. Administrative controls include training and communication, setting up safe job procedures, and of course continuing monitoring. And lastly, PPE include training on hearing protection, eye protection, respirator protection, and of course hand protection. Additional notes. Whenever you're dealing with a high-risk activity, the best control is always putting in place a safe job procedure. Safe job procedures are required for all high-risk activities, and they give you a step-by-step breakdown on how you're going to control the hazard. It'll also identify specialized equipment and training requirements. Whenever you're dealing with a high-risk activity, the control must always refer to the safe job procedure 100% of the time. When you're dealing with a medium risk activity, the best control is to either refer to your specialized PPE, such as your safety glasses, respirator, or hearing protection, or your SDS. Let's look at the examples below. A worker working with a skid steer, the hazard is moving equipment, and because it can produce more than 10 horsepower, it's a high risk activity. The controls here will be referred to our safe job procedure, moving equipment. The next example is a worker working off of a ladder and they're doing blue skinning. We're assuming that they're less than 10 feet, so working at heights equipment is not required. In this case here, the hazards are chemical hazards, fall hazards, remember they're less than 10 feet, and of course we've defined this as a medium risk activity. The controls include referring to our SDS on blue skinning and maintaining 3-point contact on the ladder or using a platform ladder. And of course, the last example, housekeeping, access egress. The hazards include slip, trips, and falls. This is a low-risk activity, and the controls are keep access egress clear and remove garbage. Once your initial controls are in place, it's important to get workers involved by asking them to finish a risk review. Once controls are put into place, workers are asked to reassess the risks where they can use their own experience, knowledge, and existing controls to determine the new rating system. For example, a seasoned skid steer operator who has been performing the same activities for many years may feel that using the skid steer after controls are put in place may be assessed as a medium or low risk activity. This is where we get workers' input and buy-in. The record management system. Consistency plays a big role in the continued success at Harbridge and Cross. Why? Because consistency is cheap and scalable. When everyone does whatever they want to do, it creates a lot of ambiguity, which is both complex and expensive. On every job site, the following health and safety management system will be put in place. This system will include a Dewey Decimal System, legal size filing cabinets with hanging folders or subfolders, and instructions on how to use the system. All Harbridge and Cross DTAs will be filed in the Harbridge and Cross work binder. Note, this binder holds Harbridge and Cross working documents only and do not add subcontractor documents to this binder. Additionally, this binder will also hold your orientation, DTAs, toolbox talks, tool inspections, harness inspections, and equipment inspections. Please make sure that all records are filed here in this binder because they will be reassessed by both Harbridge and Cross safety coordinators and IHSA auditors. Core audit questions. During the external audit process, there will be interview questions for both managers and workers. The first set of questions are pertaining to management. Are you involved in the hazard assessment process? What is your role in supporting the process of ongoing hazard assessments? And for workers, are you involved in the hazard assessment process? If not, who is? Let's look at the answer. In the first question for management, are you involved in the hazard assessment process? The answer is yes. At the start of the job, we made a list of all high-risk activities which was recorded on the project critical task list. As new trades mobilize on site, we review the pre-start program with them and update the critical task list. Also, as a supervisor, every day I review the DTAs with my workers and sign off on it. Question 2. What is your role in supporting the process of ongoing hazard assessment? Answer. As new trades mobilize on site, I review the pre-start program with them and update the critical task list. I also collect their safe job procedures. Supervisors also sign off on DTA forms with their workers. Worker. Are you involved in the hazard assessment process? If not, who is? Answer. Yes. Every day I review my DTAs with my supervisors and sign off on them. If you have any questions about this training program, please contact the Health and Safety Department. Thank you and have a great day.